Hi, welcome to this class. Now, in this class, we're going to look at the cast function. A little introduction before we look into the cast function. So, basically, here is the sales data. The sales data is part of the BigQuery public data, which is found in the Iowa liquor sales folder. Now, you have in this data set, you have like a couple of, like fields. Now, in the fields, you have, different data types. And you could see the strings, you could see the date type, you could see the float, and then you could see the integer. Now, basically, as a string is just like a text field. So it's a text field that usually is, represented some kind of category or some kind of, name or something like that. So basically, this is a string. Now, even though you might see the zip code, which is made basically like numbers in some cases, you can see this being represented as a string. Why? Because it is basically representing a category. So it's basically representing a certain area, right? And it's not supposed to be used for some calculation or something like this. And also you have the integer. The integer is also very much like the float, but the integer is numbers that are basically whole numbers and they do not have like any kind of decimals. While the float has the decimal. So basically this is the data types that we can find here. However, like date is also like basically very straightforward. It's the date type in this case. But however, there are some other data sets, data types that we have in SQL, which is like timestamp, for instance. So here we will just use the cast function to show how we could convert from one data type to another. So we come to query. Now, before we use cast, we should also put in the back of the mind that the cast must be, the data type that we're trying to convert from one data type to another must have the potential. So basically, it must have the potential of being castable. So for instance, you have like date. Date could easily be changed to a timestamp. However, a text field might be difficult to change to an integer, for instance. So in some cases where it is strictly alphabetic letters, then it's very difficult to change this to an integer. But if it's like a case of a zip code, maybe it's still possible. Maybe if all the zip codes are just plainly numbers, then it is fine. So in this case, we will first start with a date, and then we will look at how do we convert date to a timestamp. So so here we are selecting date just to give us, this kind of feel of where we're coming from. And then here it's just going to be like, let's cast the date into some kind of timestamp, right? So the cast is, like reshape the date into a timestamp. So what is the format of cast function? You have the cast, and then you put it into a bracket, and then you put the date, right? And then so basically, what this is saying is you want to cast this date, and then you have to say, as what would you like to cast it as, which is basically timestamp here. So we could basically name this. This is date timestamp. So when we run this query now, what do we get? We get a new column which basically has the date, but then it adds some new, values which represent the hour and maybe like the minute and then the second. So also in the same fashion, we can convert back from timestamp to date, but we don't have a timestamp field in this particular query. Now, another very possible thing is to convert from string to integers, but this is only possible if the whole field has only in numbers. So if maybe your string is numbers plus letters, then it's not possible to convert from string to an integer. But if it is just numbers and that has been saved as string, then it is possible. So for instance, here we could use the zip code, right? the zip code as an example. So when we cast, what we will do is we will cast zip code, right, as integer, right? So when we do this now, what do we get? So when we run this query now, we notice that we will get the number back, right? So we just get some number, but it looks like it's the same, but it's not. Then I will show you why, what is the difference here. So for instance, if we were to comment this out, for instance, and then we come and say zip code, the previous zip code, which is the string, and then we add a 2 to this. So when we add a 2 to this case, what happens is we will get an error. Now, what is the error saying? It says that it's only possible to add, you cannot add string plus integer, but you can only add integer plus integer. You can add float plus float, numeric plus numeric, big numeric, and all these kind of things down the line. So it's telling you it's not possible to add a string and a number, basically. So this basically also means like, okay, so this is definitely the reason why the string wouldn't work in this case. And so when we add the 2 to the number, right? And then when we run this query, we see that it runs normally, right? And this is mainly because that we have been able to change from a string to a number. And then that's why the computation is now working. So this is another case, which is basically converting from string to integer. Now, when we look at the data set as well, we could see that we have this state bottle cost, which is basically having some decimal places. Unlike the bottle volume ML, which seems not to have any bottle, but doesn't have any decimal places. Now, this case is most likely an integer, the bottle volume ML, but the state bottle cost is most likely a float. I mean, it's most likely a float. So when we check this out, we will probably see it like that. So here we have an integer, and that's the reason it doesn't have any decimals. And here we have what a float is. So here now, what we'll try to do is we'll convert the float to an integer and see how it works. So basically you're selecting state bottle cost, right? And then you're trying to cast state bottle cost, also state bottle cost as an integer, right? So basically we'll see how it works. So when we run this query, what we automatically see here now is we see that the query basically takes the integer and then it rounds it up. So it just sees, oh, this is 13.0. It rounds it up to 13. 2.42, it rounds it up to 2. 5.94, it rounds it up to 6 because then this part is more than 5. And this is how it basically does. So this is how you cast from, a float to an integer. But what if we wanted to go the other way around? So here in this case, assuming we wanted to cast, a float, an integer to a float. So here we could have our bottle volume ML. We put it here, right? And then we cast as a float 64, right? And so here maybe we just keep this here as well so that it is, serving as some kind of reference. So when we run this query now, what do we get? We get a new column. So this is the normal column that doesn't have any kind of decimals. And then when we run the new column, it just introduces some sort of decimal. Now, all these things are very, very key in different ways. Because also when we try to do some kind of, like calculation in particular, and then we were working mainly on integer, then it's possible that the answer will always be an integer. So I will give you an example here as well. So for instance, you have this bottle ml field, right? Bottle volume ml. And then when you divide the bottle volume ml with bottles sold, so here, and then we try to see that this is bottle volume ml, And then this is bottle sold. So when we run this query now, we can see that it basically just does the division, the way we would like to see it. But I mean, if we wanted to keep this as maybe like an integer, we could also basically cast it as well as an integer. And then this is the new normal in this case. So basically, this is the idea of casting. I know there are many different other data types, but this is the ones that we have covered in this course. You could basically also use some kind of material to find even more data types. Yeah, see you in the next one. Thank you.